Welcome to KnotWork Storytelling. This is the show where we untangle our myths and reweave our stories, one age-old tale at a time. I'm your host and lead storyteller, Marisa Gowdy. I'm a myth worker, a story healer, a coach for writers and creative entrepreneurs, and the author of The Sovereignty Knot, A Woman's Way to Freedom, Power, Love, and Magic. If you love what you hear and want to support the show, I'd be so grateful if you'd become a paid subscriber on Substack. In my newsletter, Myth is Medicine, you'll receive bonus content related to the stories on the show and deep dives into how mythology and folklore can help heal the individual and the collective in the present moment and beyond. There's a link in the show notes to follow Myth is Medicine on Substack, or visit mythismedicine.substack.com. Before we explore this week's story, I have a question for you. What about your stories? Whether it's a book project that wants to be birthed, deep, authentic writing to support your business, or a personal creative project you can't quite name yet, I'm here to support your process and help you get your words onto the page and into the world. I work with folks who are writing memoirs, chronicles of the spiritual journey, and books that explore healing in the imagination, even as they explore the toughest truths of life. I support entrepreneurs, especially coaches and therapists in private practice, who wish to weave their personal experiences with their professional knowledge and wisdom. Do you want to build a writing practice and develop the ideas you know you must share? I invite you to visit my brand new website, writingcoachmarisa.com, to learn more about my services and to set up a free 30-minute consultation. I would love to talk with you about your stories. Season 5, Episode 11, Molly's Story. Our guest storyteller is Erica O'Reilly. As a sacred storyteller, spiritual counselor, and ordained minister, Erica's work is rooted in creating spaces where souls feel seen, held, and heard. Erica's lifelong love for the arts and collaboration in community has taken her all over the world, including Ottawa, Toronto, Northern Ontario, New York, Italy, and Ireland. Recently, her theater company, Into the Circle, premiered its inaugural show, Stars, Stones, and Shadows, A Heroine's Tale, at the 2023 Ottawa Fringe Festival, to rave reviews. Being of French and Irish ancestry, Erica is deeply grateful to the traditional spirits and land keepers of the unceded and unsurrendered territory of the Algonquin Anishinaabe people, where she was born and currently resides. As she says, a million thanks, mille buikas, for this opportunity to live, create, and share stories alongside you. I am so honored to have Erica with us here today. I know her as a fellow traveler and also as a writer in our Writer's Knot community. This global community of creatives comes together to imagine, to find solace, to find connection. Some of our storytellers are like Erica and are really doing this work out in the world, while others are doing that personal, private, oh so necessary heart work that happens when you're just starting to develop the stories of a lifetime. Right now, I've extended enrollment in the Writer's Knot through the beginning of September. This next group will gather together and be together on until December. You can find all the details about the Writer's Knot at my website, marisagowdy.com. I am so excited to welcome Erica to the podcast today. Now, as is our way on KnotWork Storytelling, we first ask the story to speak for itself, and then we'll explore all the ways that it still resonates and matters. So, Erica, will you tell us a story?
Yes, indeed. Mille buikas, 1,000 thanks. Let's take a journey together. Growing up along the coast of Dublin Bay, Molly loved to look out into the sea and dream of the journeys her soul could embark on. And at the same time, Growing up as a fishmonger's daughter, Molly also knew all too well the meaning of a hard day's work. And as she transitioned into womanhood, while she could have been anyone she dreamed of, the family business fell upon her shoulders. And while she dutifully took it on with pride as a way of supporting her family, within her heart every day she was grateful to make her way down to the bay to rest amongst the waters, the waves, and the gluttony of the gulls, for here she felt at home. One day, as she made her way, she noticed the wind sounded a little bit different that day. As she looked down the shoreline, she noticed a small old washerwoman, veiled in heavy cloaks of charcoal gray, tending to the dressing garments in the sea's edge. Enthralled by her, Molly gently placed down her wheelbarrow and settled into the sand, wiggling her bottom, her fingers, and her toes right in as she allowed the song of the old washerwoman to roll over her. She hadn't intended on falling asleep, but when Molly opened her eyes, she realized a gentle fog had rolled into the bay and the sun had began to set. Since she didn't have time to check for today's catch, she gathered her things and made her way into town. Yet, with each step, she noticed how her body grew heavier and heavier, and how beads of sweat began to gather along her hairline and drip down her back. Grateful that she didn't have to make her way into town, as she crossed the threshold into her family's home, she decided to rest for a while. The next time she opened her eyes, she found herself in her childhood bedroom, cooled in warm candlelight. And as she danced between the state of a wakefulness and the dreamscape, Molly noticed how her head buzzed, her bones ached, and while she was layered beneath blankets, strong and woolen, her nightgown clung to her as she shivered in sweat. She was too weak to step out of bed and change, so instead she decided to give way for the fever. And in due time, peacefulness washed over her body. And as she listened to the sounds of the room, she recognized the familiar clinking of her beloved Gran's pitcher and water basin. And while her Gran had passed many, many years ago, she recognized the sound of water gently pooling to the basin's edge. And then the familiar feeling of a cold washcloth placed upon her forehead. In this moment, it all felt familiar, and Molly found herself longing for the days in her childhood where her greatest burden that she carried was how many rocks she would skip across the bay that day. As she rested here, she found sleep slowly calling to her. Little did she know, as she drifted away, beside her bed rested the old washerwoman, veiled in heavy cloaks of charcoal gray, tending to her fevered forehead as Molly drifted off to sleep once more. The next time when Molly opened her eyes, she found herself knee deep in seawater and gazing upon the most glorious sunset her eyes had ever seen. While this place felt familiar, there was something liminal about it. For the water was still as glass, and yet it reflected the richest hues of robin egg blue.
Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh.
Molly was brought back to the present moment at the grand wingspan of Crane as she flew above her and then landed at her feet. Looking deep into Crane's eyes, she could sense the ancient wisdom, and the two souls shared a moment in wordless conversation. And while Molly wasn't sure what it was about Crane, there was something about her presence that made her feel as though everything was as it was to be. The next thing she noticed was a gentle tapping at her knees, and when she looked down, before her rested a beautiful currach, an ancient boat beckoning her to step aboard. So that is what she did. As she took her seat and nestled in, she intuitively reached for the oars, and as she looked up to the horizon, she noticed Crane had taken the helm beside her, almost as though knowing the way. And as the sun took rest for the evening and the moon took her rightful place in the starlit sky, Crane and Molly launched out into the sea. And just as they entered into the liminal space, the cosmos lulled Molly and Crane into their evening journey. When Molly awoke once more, this time she stared up at the midday sky, the sun high above her, and she felt the persistent pecking of Crane at her nightgown. She sat up, and she noticed that the boat had found itself on the edge of an island, and before her stood the most majestic view of forests as far as the eye could see, an abundance of green. Yet, off in the distance, there seemed to be a trail of smoke that danced up into the sky. Molly thought surely there would be somebody sitting at the edge of that fire, and they would be able to give her direction as to where she was supposed to be. So she gently hopped out of the boat and began to make her way inland. And while she wasn't wearing shoes, she noticed how the earth and the mosses beneath her feet welcomed her every step.
Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh.
With Crane's sturdy guidance high above her, Molly entered through the threshold of a forest and danced beneath the ancient boughs of the grand trees. Deeper and deeper she moved into this forest, the sound of a bow wren drumming the heartbeat of the earth, drawing her closer and closer until she found herself in a grand clearing. And before her stood a circle of Mana Fasa, wise women, grand matriarchs of their generations. While time had etched lines across their faces, their souls shone with youthful exuberance. Kedmila Falcha, granddaughter, we've been waiting for you. And while Molly didn't recognize the woman who was speaking to her, something about her felt very familiar. Come, sit with us by the fire. We have bread and butter abound. Eat, child, eat. So that's exactly what Molly did. She took her place in the circle and filled herself so full with bread and butter she felt like she would burst. And she was grateful, for she couldn't remember the last time her belly had felt so full. Almost on cue, she then heard, "Granddaughter, when you're all set, can you come and help me over here with this, please?" As she held a great shawl up into the air. And that's exactly what Molly did. She went and took her place beside this wise woman as her knitting needles moved methodically, almost magically on their own. The wise woman told Molly stories of her childhood, and while some of them made Molly giggle, Others were more sorrowful, as the wise woman shared stories of her beloved family members who had crossed the veil before her. When the stories had ended, the wise woman wrapped Molly in the emerald green shawl and whispered something in her ear. And while Molly didn't recognize the sounds of old Irish, her soul welcomed their melody and message. And for the rest of the day, Molly, alongside the Mana Fasa, danced and sang and ate and drummed and laughed in grand celebration of what Molly wasn't quite sure. But in due time, the sun took rest for the evening, and the moon took her rightful place in the starlit sky as Molly found herself nestled beside the fire. And as she peered into the flames, she recognized images of her own childhood. She recognized the cobblestone streets of Dublin that she loved so much. And then there was her favorite day. She recognized her mother and her father taking her down to the shore's edge to teach her how to harvest mussels for the first time. And on that day, they didn't rush back into town right away. Instead, the three of them sat amongst the sand, giggling and pretending the mussels were puppets, telling stories of the selkies in the sea. You see, Molly didn't grow up with much, but she grew up with wealth more than any could imagine, surrounded by the love of her mother, her father, and her beloved Gran. And at that thought, Molly felt grief roll through her body, for she wished she could have celebrated today with her grandmother. But soon sleep was calling to her as her eyelids felt heavy, and she felt the familiar sensation of warm hands gently brushing her hair and gently tucking it behind her ears. And just as she drifted off to sleep, she could have sworn the song being sung by the Mana Fasa around her sounded so familiar. When Molly awoke the next day, she found herself back in the kirk, wading in the water as though cradled beneath a mother's loving hand. But something felt different. As she sat up, she noticed the fog had blown in and it was heavy. She couldn't see her hands in front of her. And Crane was nowhere to be seen. Whoosh, whoosh, whoosh. While she could hear her, Molly scrambled for the oars and began to row, and yet the currach wasn't moving as quickly or as smoothly as it had the day before. And as she began to panic, her frustration built as Crane would swoop into view and then whoosh, head out of sight. She refused to be lost at sea. As she found her breath, she recognized the familiar sound of Crane's wings above her and decided that as long as she could hear her, Molly couldn't get lost. One, two, three. In time, Molly's breath returned, and the rhythm of her strokes followed the rhythm of Crane's wings. One, two, three. Thud. Molly's body lurched forward suddenly as the fog parted, and she found herself at the edge of another shoreline, except this one felt much different than the one the day before. Before her was a rocky landscape with boulders jutting up from the earth, each one taller than the next, as though giants standing over each other. And that's when she heard the old woman's song before she saw her. Lay my body down. Fear and awe rolled through Molly's body as she looked down the shoreline, and sure enough, there was the old washerwoman, veiled in heavy cloaks of charcoal gray, and she was looking right at Molly. She didn't understand how this old washerwoman felt so familiar and yet so different than the Mana Fasa she had shared the day with before. And in an instant, the old washerwoman turned quickly and began to make her way inland, almost floating. Following her impulse, Molly hopped out of the boat and ran after her. "Wait, who are you?" she called. Up and down and around, up and down and around, Molly made her way through the boulders, running after the old washerwoman, but each time she thought she was close enough, it was as though her song was further and further away, until in a last-ditch effort, she placed her arm out with hopes that she would touch the old washerwoman, but instead, she disappeared into thin air, leaving only a small comb on the ground before her. Molly knew all too well the tales of the death messenger's comb. Startled, she stumbled backwards, and her heels caught the edge of a cliff as the rock gave way beneath her feet, and she heard it tumble hundreds of meters below. Exhausted, her body fell beneath the sturdy rock, and while it held her, she felt grief roll through her. Salt rivers of tears danced across her face and pooled at the rocks beneath her. While she longed to cry for help, her voice got caught in her throat. No one would hear her. All felt hopeless, for she was alone. "Granddaughter, open your eyes." And while her vision was blurry with tears, standing before her was Molly's beloved Gran. And with her gentle guidance, her grandmother offered her a hand as Molly found her way back up onto her feet. And she noticed how her beloved Gran's once fragile frame now stood sturdy and strong. And that's when she knew. Granddaughter. Just as the crane guided you, just as the kirk cradled you, just as the Mana Fasa celebrated you, and just as the Mana Queensha will mourn for you, I am here to guide you from this world into the next. For you see, none of this had been a dream. Instead, it had been Molly's soul in Rama into death as she moved from this world into the next. And in that moment, Molly felt grief rolling through her body once more, for she would miss her father's strong hands. She would miss her mother's love-filled eyes. And she had only wished that she had known that their last goodbye would in fact be the final one. And as though reading her mind, Molly's beloved Gran said, "Darling, do not fear for the ones who are left behind. They will find their way in due time. Now, are you ready?" And with a deep breath, Molly took her beloved Gran's hand, and almost on cue, the heavens erupted in the most miraculous colors of purples, greens, and blues as Molly and her grandmother made their way across the rainbow bridge into the sky. And as they did that, Molly's keen for her own soul was heard in this world and the next. Lay my body down, lay my body down, lay my body down, down to the shore. On the day. As the sun took rest for the evening and the moon took her rightful place in the starlit sky, some say that the wails of the banshee could be heard down the Dublin streets, broad and narrow, as Molly took her last breath. And I like to think whether Molly's tale is fact or folklore, that the song that can be heard in Irish pubs across the globe, sung with joy and celebration, can also be shared in honor and reverence and grief for the soul of a beloved young woman who crossed the veil far too soon.
In Dublin's fair city, where the girls are so pretty, I first laid my eyes on sweet Molly Malone, as she wheeled her wheelbarrow down streets broad and narrow, with cockles and mussels alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, with cockles and mussels alive, alive, oh. She was a fishmonger, and sure 'twas no wonder, for so was her father and mother before, as they wheeled their wheelbarrows down streets broad and narrow, with cockles and mussels alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, with cockles and mussels alive, alive, oh. She died of the fever, and no one could save her, and that was the end for sweet Molly Malone. Now her ghost wheels her barrow down streets broad and narrow, with cockles and mussels alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, with cockles and mussels alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, alive, alive, oh, with cockles and mussels alive, alive, oh, with cockles and mussels alive, alive, oh.
Thank you. There are no words yet, but thank you. Me and the Puikas. You have taken us on a journey across time and space and taken the familiar and shaken it with such wildly loving hands. Everyone who hears your story will be transformed, just as you helped transform Molly for all of us.
An
Thank
honor
you.
and a pleasure.
Mm, mm. I told you before we started recording, this transition's the trickiest part of any episode, right? Because when we enter in to the other world. You really and you truly took us into the mythical imagination, the mythic reality of Molly's story. It's hard to find words again here
Mhm.
in the present. So I want to anchor us in with, and I get the joy of having been able to watch you tell this story. So anyone who can ever see Erica on a stage, you must go and watch this woman perform and not just hear these tones, but to see, well, the alchemy that you're doing. And it's one of those things that's so fully sensorial. But so I'd like to ask, what's your experience in telling this story, in the performance of it? We'll get to all the ways you crafted it, but let's start with the experience of transmitting it to us.
For me, it always feels like such a gift. I've learned as a sacred storyteller that the medicine or the spirits of the stories come to me, but the stories aren't mine to own.
Mm,
So when I'm sharing the story, I really try to be the hollow bone so that the story can offer its medicine to people who are listening without having an attachment of how that's done. And at the same time, there are moments where I feel moved, and it's that grounding of coming back to the structure, the support of a hollowed bone, knowing I can still channel this. I can feel the emotion behind it and still stay rooted enough to let the story move as it's going to move.
mm. Oh, gorgeous. That hollow bone tradition, you know your sacred storytelling roots so well. Do you know what's that from? Where's that phrase? Who gave that to us?
I think I've heard it in different women's circles and in my
Mm,
training in the mythic arts, in the ancient ways of knowing. It's just for me such a very clear visual and embodied knowing of, okay, how can I be rooted in my power and
mhm.
still be able to offer something of service to others?
Gorgeous. I'm so struck by the kind of beautiful paradox of the way that you give us such an immensely lush and living story that takes us through the veil to the sort of the most subtle realms, and it's anchored all in the bones.
Mhm,
And it gives us such that full spectrum of what it is to be alive and what it is to be dead. Because you took us into Molly's other world. You took us into her death journey.
mhm.
Say more about that. How that's found you, what this means to you.
The story came to me about just over a year ago, and I was completing a beautiful training called Matriarchy with Sarah Richardson,
Mm.
and was held in such community for 6 months, surrounded and circled by wonderful women. And I was very drawn to the portion of studying the ancient ways of the Manafasa, the Manalias, the Manaquincha, all of these very strong matriarchal women, the knowledge keepers of Celtic Ireland. And I was really drawn to the ways of the Manaquincha, the keening women. And I knew that before going into the training. And when we got to that portion of knowledge sharing, I found myself very curious about, we hear a lot about the 3-day Irish wake after somebody passes, but I found myself wondering, does a soul know before it passes? And what would that look like 3 days if a soul had an awareness of the ethereal journey as it moves from this world into the next? And was very curious about it. I was tuning into all sorts of podcasts too of other wisdom keepers around, the Irish wakes, the Irish funerals, and the Irish concept of death. And I was actually doing a show at the time for Samhain with a friend, and I was playing with this idea. And oftentimes when stories come to me, it's either in a song. So sometimes I get the tune beforehand, and the Molly's Keen was kind of in my creative realm. And my friend and I were sharing our ideas for the show. And I said, I have this idea for a story, but I'm not sure what her name is yet. I've asked, but I haven't received it. And my friend had said, well, I really want to include Molly's song, like Cockles and Mussels, in the show. Do we think we could do it? And I'm like, absolutely. And as soon as that landed, it all it all sort of clicked for me where the story that was stepping forward was Molly's story without being attached to it being the folklore or fact-based storyline that we hear about in today's society. I'm like, "Oh, this woman's name is Molly, and we're just gonna weave the song in such a way."
So much women's magic.
Mhm.
And that's a perfect way for us just to give our listeners who may not know their manaz,
Mm,
we've kind of dropped a lot of those lines in here, and I want to orient those who are not Irish
for sure.
speakers or who have, not much more than Diagwit and Fulcha.
Mhm.
Can we give people the power of the manaz? Can we go through the manaf and really talk about what each of them are?
Let me see if I can remember them off the top of my head.
It's not a quiz. It's an
Oh gosh.
immersion. It's an immersion course.
I've moved from being my ethereal self to, oh my gosh, I'm in my brain. For me, the ones that stand out personally, the Mana Quincha being the keening women, the Mana Gluna, the woman on her haunches, the midwives. For me, that one also resonates as not only the physical midwives of women supporting other women through the birthing process, but also the soul midwives who work in the realm of death. Very like that close connection between the Monaquincha, the keening women, and the soul or the literal midwives. The Mana Elias being the medicine women. For me, that often resonates very much as one who's dropping in is Peg Sayers. Peg Sayers is our
Mm,
storyteller.
yeah.
Who's our uh, Biddy Early?
Bitty early.
Manal,
Bitty early.
Manal
Yeah.
Elias with Biddy Early and her beautiful little blue bottle.
Yes.
So the women who know the magic of the plants and the herbs are the ones that those are the first ones that come to mind for me.
Oh, thank you. I love this about those of us who speak a bit of Irish and the way we get to start dropping it and peppering it into our language. And I'm always aware of when we're speaking to broader audiences, like, wait, let's fold everybody in and make sure they're with us on the journey.
Oh,
But the
absolutely.
other women, of course, there's grandmother energy through this
Mhm.
story, megawatt. Before we get to talking about Gran, I'd love to talk a little bit about the old washerwoman and the banshee energy that's all contained in her magic.
Mhm. I when the story came to me, I remember thinking like this is a little bit different than what I've learned so far
Mm,
in the sense of almost uh, in some of the stories too of the imminent fear and which is connected to which makes sense often this fear of death, but I think it's in Patricia Lysett's work. She spoke about the banshee being almost the death messenger for the community to let the
mm,
community know to prepare for somebody's passing. And for me that landed as, oh, there's a guidance there. It's a sense of cueing preparation, cueing community, cueing
mm,
connection. And I thought, okay, so what if this story was a step away from the fear and a way of introducing, whether even through creative liberties, this idea of the banshee being a guide for souls as well.
mm. There's so much there, but I want to loop back just and underline for
Mhm,
a moment the gorgeousness of what you're giving us in this speaking around community and the banshee as being the harbinger, not just for one, but for all.
mhm,
And that's been very close to my heart right now. And I feel like it's really emerging collectively in terms of what our individual work is meant to be is that expansion from maybe it's that 20th century North American bend on hyper individualism.
mhm,
This is really a beautiful way of not necessarily refuting it, but saying, here is one woman's soul journey from life to death. And it is an immense collective journey from the representation of what the washerwoman Banshee is offering, and then going to this, well, I guess I'll call them a council of grandmothers, all the Mana who are there in the other world, welcoming her in and offering her the bread and butter and saying, we're here to sustain you.
mhm.
I know so much of your work has this sort of blend between being that solitary creative and the performer who creates these community spaces. Let's explore these ideas a little bit.
I love this because being a storyteller, and when I use the term sacred storyteller, I say that with reverence and gratitude, where it's not about the ego, it's about sacred being my nod to the other world, my creative collaborators, the spirits of the stories showing up for me. And yet there's moments, the bones coming back to the hollow bone, the bones of the stories often have moments that are connected to my own journey. So the gathering of the grandmothers was inspired by a personal vision or visitation I had in ceremony one day, linked to the experience of death. And on the other side, I was welcomed by a beautiful circle of women who were feeding me the soda bread, and it was so much love and warmth. So it's for me, it's such a beautiful opportunity to weave universal invitations inspired by some of my own personal experiences. Um,
I want to loop back too to the bread and the butter scene because it reminded me of that warning, like never take a drink or have a bite to eat if you enter into fairy, right? Whether it's the
oh,
story of Thomas the Rhymer or many stories from Irish folklore, you may go and dance with them all night long, but make sure you don't eat or drink what's offered. And of course, Molly does because she's already crossed over. And it was so interesting to be able to celebrate with her of like, yes, eat and drink your fill. It's finally your time because it's your time.
well, how cool is that? I didn't know about that aspect of the folklore and getting lost in the realm of Nadihi Maha. Like, don't eat the food. Wow,
Don't eat the food.
and that's always the magic and the surprise that I
Mm.
love in sharing stories, where you go, oh, that wasn't I didn't intend to do that, but how cool that, how some people receive it. There's those kind of glimmers of the medicine that it offers people without intending for it.
Right. And that's where we can just kind of nod back to the collective again and say, of course, sacred storytellers work with an entire league of unseen forces and beings. You just didn't know you received that whisper when you wove in that piece of the story. And isn't that just part of the magic, part of the drea?
Yes, indeed.
Mm. There's so many places to go with this. I'm feeling called to ask you about the way that you really weave so much into your storytelling. I mean, you have given us obviously narrative, you've given us the song and the drum and your voice. Bring us into, and I'm brought to the mind that phrase "fitchafuacha," that idea of interwoven. And
Mm.
so much of what I know of you as a creative, but also just in the performance you offered us, so much is woven in together. Can you talk a little bit about that magic?
For me, with the drum especially, I find with the nature of a lot of the stories that I'm called to share, being either in the other world or that kind of liminal space as we move in between, as a space holder and a spiritual counselor, I like to be very intentional as to where ceremony or theatrical gatherings are starting. And for me, the drum is very much that way of anchoring in ceremony and then starting with opening the space and then coming back to the drum at the end to close the space. And it always just brings me back to, we hear it in different ways that some of the first drum beats we hear is the heartbeat of our own mothers. So the drum is very much that rooted anchor for me. And with the voice, the use of song and voice is relatively new to me. And so I find in the more stories I tell, the more I am learning to trust my voice. For a long time growing up, even as doing theater or being in musicals, it was almost like to fully open the body, to fully open my voice and be expressed however it's going to show up, whether it's beautifully melodic or all of a sudden it cracks, to just trusting my voice. And while I'm still in that process of really allowing my body to relax for my voice to fully emerge, I find the stories are this beautiful channel for me to not only share the spirit of the story, but it's that medicine that storytellers also receive, right? So as a story comes to us, while it serves to offer soothing balms or medicine often at the point in my life when they're showing up. There's still the spiraling of constantly getting to know ourselves more deeply, and the voice becomes a way of not only my offering, but also that way of reminding and remembering within myself that I'm safe to open and express and use my voice. And then the use of words, I've found, especially learning more about imbis within the Irish tradition.
Can you define that for us before we keep going?
I might need to lean into, I know it as a feeling.
Yes.
The words always escape my brain.
Well, the dictionary definition or the lived definition from so many of the beautiful teachers and companions we have at this
Mhm,
point in our lives is poetic inspiration
mhm,
or inspiration that illuminates.
mhm.
So tell me more about the feeling in your body. If that's the way you might write it on the page, how does it show up for you? What is
It
imbus veracity for you?
it often, if it's rooted in a knowing that's connected directly to my higher self.
Mm,
Now we're going into the woo. We're going into my
we're going
my
deep, sister.
spiritual counselor background. But when Imbish shows up, if it feels connected to my higher self, it comes through the heart,
Yeah.
and the words just come to the page. I can sit at my computer and they just spill out. If it feels connected to the compassionate wisdom of my guides, the other world, or the story itself, it's often as a loving presence around my ears, in and
Mm.
around my head and my ears. And then it's like, I'm sure you've seen me sometimes in our writers' not gatherings where I'm typing and I'm kind of like leaning off to the side, like as if somebody's whispering something to me. That's like my embodied way of going, oh, what's there? And just trusting what's flowing through me.
Can I observe something? Is when you sang, you do the same exact, you lean in exactly the same way. You're
That's
singing back to them. You were offering it back.
mm, it's
Wow.
amazing the wisdom of the body, eh? And those intuitions and instincts. I hadn't realized it till just now.
Oh, what a gift. What a gift. I want to loop back to what you were saying before about as a performer. And I'll name this is partially a personal preoccupation of mine right now. As I have two children, I am dropping off at dance camp and theater camp and bringing them to all their ways of performing. And it brings up a bit of my own, well, nostalgia for who I was allowed to be, who so many of us were allowed and invited to be when we were young, and we're moving from elementary to middle to high school. That performer self was so well nurtured and so fearless. And then I think many of us go through the terrible, beautiful phenomenon of maturation that then says, oh, that was children's stuff. I'm going to put that away. And in hearing you talk about you reopening your voice. And I'm not sure if I'm inserting the I want to hear more from you about your journey with that. But as you're discovering your voice and using it in new ways as an adult, as a performer, I'm just I'm feeling such a gift and a transmission in that because I think there's so many grown-ups in the world who felt as if those days when they got to be on the stage and let their voices crack and dare to be heard and have everyone applaud was the stuff that had to be left behind in that other version of life. There's so much permission giving in what you are giving us and so many performers who are willing to say, I'm going to experiment with this and see what it's like. But I think it's often really all too rare in our adult lives if we've had a gap from that being that young self celebrated into it might still be in me. There
Mhm,
might be more.
mhm. That, as you say, that it's the spiraling back, coming back to the triple spiral,
Mm,
feels very closely related to like one's done. Like for me,
mhm.
that word in Irish is very much in alignment with soul's purpose, soul's gift, soul's destiny. And I was very similar as I grew up with my mom telling me stories of how I had no problem disagreeing with someone. I had no problem, standing up for myself. And then as life does, there's almost, it's not a shutting down. I remember there being a scene in Finding Neverland where it talked about that moment of transition where children go from knowing and seeing magic to all of a sudden, maybe it not being okay, it not being accepted, it not being, quote, safe. And oftentimes, in the moments in my life where I've acknowledged the fears, the inner stories that our wonderful, beautiful, magical brains can weave, to acknowledge it and then go, okay, but what does my body want? What does my heart want? And when I landed here, it was like, no, I want to go back into storytelling because regardless of where I've landed over the years, I've always described myself as a storyteller. And then the path opened up a little bit more and I was pointed in a direction. And so I so resonate with that pause or that learning period in often our after like age 7, 8, 9, 10 into our teens where there's already so many changes and challenges happening that there's almost a pause. And if one can be still enough and trust ourselves, even if it's just that little morsel part that's like, no, this voice is here, that urge to be creative, because there's artistry and creativity in all of us. And in today's world, oftentimes it's not given the space, the honor, the reverence to say that is something to be celebrated and shared. And so, as I stumble along as gracefully as I can along my own path, I'm always circling back to, okay, how do I forge my own path and don't follow? And that's, I say that too, knowing it's not always as easily said as it is done. And I've written as of late being like the working with and trusting and leaning into my dawn, my soul's path, my soul's gift, my soul's journey can be incredibly challenging in today's age when we're still human beings having to navigate the realities of still got to put a roof over my head, still got to put food on the table. So it's a dance. And I often have to remind myself to sit in stillness and listen and then be open to what stirs within me, within my heart and my body, and then what other glimmers around me are giving me the nudges going, go that way, go that way.
Oh, that's all so beautifully put. Thank you. That's such a gift. And what occurs to me in what you said as we begin to close our conversation, my goodness, this hour has gone so fast. That idea of you were describing that sense of the almost like the portal closing at the conclusion of childhood. It reminded me in the sense that there's this portal you've created in your story of that movement from life into death, but it's that sense of if childhood takes us into sort of in a way a diminishment of the possibility and all the expansiveness, you're telling us a story that is talking about a portal back into that expansiveness and in an entirely new way. So as we start to close out, can we just sort of play together in the expansiveness of what it is to go into the other world and into this journey?
Mhm. It's so, for me, I'm fascinated about how the brain works, how my brain works. And while I physically in my body know I tuned into the other world as a child, the linear memories aren't as clear in my brain, or the linear stories to speak to it aren't necessarily there, but I know it because the stories are so accessible to me. And the way we can tune into it for me has always been through nature. And I've been writing about this lately where I'm like, there was this almost like, I'm kind of scared, but this is very magical. I'm like, something's about to happen every night as the sun would go down. And as I've been writing about it, I'm like, it's that sense of the Midsummer's Night's Dream. What Shakespeare spoke about, or hearing tales of Nadini Maha, this other world emerging as some of us go to rest for the evening. So for me, there's a lot of gratitude and reverence for the other world that holds and supports us, and really honoring that in the way I best know how, in opening space and then closing space. So then folks aren't left kind of like, where are we? Like, I just experienced this very big story, but I don't know how to land back in my body. And that's why it's for me as a storyteller and a space facilitator and a practitioner to go, we open the space, we go on a journey, we close the space, and we come back to our bodies. So that because we're still human beings, and there's magic to being in our physical natural world. So to always come home to our bodies.
As we close our conversation, how would you recommend we come home to ourselves?
For me, the invitation feels that it's about finding the moments for stillness, finding the moments for pause, even whether you're out in the woods or you live in rural areas or if you're in urban settings. Find where pause feels good, and then inviting yourself to just listen. And that's not always an easy task. That's why, like, little bits at a time, 1 minute, 2 minutes. I love this park down the block. I love sitting and watching the dogs, and that could be the pause. Or if it's jumping in a lake or being present when you're washing your hair in the shower, those moments of pause to breathe and say, okay, what am I called to know in this moment?
Thank you for the immense gift that was your story and your insight, and it is you. I'm so, so grateful to have you in my circle of wise, wise women. Na Fasa. You just bring such light. I'm so grateful to you.
Thank you so much.
Is there any way you'd like to tell folks about how they can find you and all the gorgeous work you're doing?
For sure. So if folks are finding that the story resonated, I do share kind of my creative process, my personal journey through Substack at Weavings of the Wise and Embodied. And then if something else just resonates, you can check out my website. It's into the circle.com, or send me an email there as well through my website. I was saying with my partner the other day, we were talking about the nature of our names, and while it's like I'm not just Erica O'Reilly, and it just had me thinking, if somebody asked the question like, "Who are you?" I would often introduce myself as I am a giant heart who wants to give and receive love while I'm here, and to offer reminders for other people that they're never journeying alone. And that third part, that other people in the world know, however life is showing up for them, that they're never journeying alone. There are offerings on my website, and if you want to connect, please feel welcome to reach out.
I'm not sure if it's the right Irish, but I love the idea of you as a Cree Moor, big heart,
Mm,
grand heart. Well, gra more, sister. Mila Buikas. Thank you for being with us today.
thank you.
Thank you for tuning in to the KnotWork Storytelling Podcast. Please subscribe and review the show on your favorite podcast platform, and do share this episode with other lovers of myth and story. By the way, everyone is a lover of myth and story, even if they've forgotten. Creating this show is a labor of love, and your support will help me continue to craft and share stories through this season and beyond. Please consider becoming a subscriber to my paid newsletter, Myth is Medicine. You'll find it on Substack, and that's where all my newest writing and occasional bonus podcasts can be found. You can learn more about my writing, my book, our online creative community, The Writer's Knot, as well as how to work with me as a writing coach over at marisagowdy.com. Gratefully, I live, write, work, and record this podcast on the ancestral lands of the Munsee Lenape tribe, whose name means original people.